New South Wales has recorded 10 new cases of coronavirus in the 24 hours to 8 p.m. last night, and this includes new infections linked to the Croydon cluster in Sydney's inner west. Our reporters Ashley Raper and Jonathan Hare join me now from Sydney. Firstly to you, Ash, take us through the new numbers.
Yes, Lena, there have been 10 new locally acquired cases here in New South Wales. Now, 5 of those are linked to the Avalon cluster, and that cluster has now reached 144 cases. Now, the other emerging cluster, the Croydon family cluster, there are 3 new cases, so there are now 9 family members infected. Now, the 9th case was a close contact of a previous known case, but the 10th case here in Sydney is in a man in Western Sydney, and the source of his infection yet can't be traced. Now, this Croydon cluster that we found out about yesterday, and it's through family gatherings over the Christmas period, is still causing authorities here concern because there are 34 close contacts associated with that extended family. And today, the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Kerry Chance, said, many of those family members were out and about over the Christmas period, not just getting together over with family, but also at shops they were working. So there's still a lot of concern around that Croydon cluster. There's 9 cases associated with that. Now, there is some good news today that testing numbers there's been an uptest in testing numbers. 28,000 people were tested yesterday, and authorities here have really tried to urge people to get tested because it gives a sense of what's happening here in New South Wales with the virus and this outbreak, and whether that New South Wales has got a handle on it. So here today, they were very happy that their testing numbers have increased.
If you have the mildest of symptoms, please make sure you get tested and stay home until you're advised otherwise. The last thing we want is to welcome in 2021 with a super spreading event. 2021, all of us are hoping, will be easier on us than 2020. And let's start the year off on a positive foot by doing the right thing.
Ash, there's a lot more venues that have been named with alerts. What more have authorities been able to say about this growing cluster, particularly in the city's inner west?
Yeah, so this Croydon cluster, as I mentioned, a lot of the family members had been when they were infectious, unknowingly out and about. There's no sense here that this family has done anything wrong, but there are a number of venues scattered across Sydney. It's not just in the inner west. There are fewer in the inner west, but some in Bankstown in southwestern Sydney. They're in Bass Hill. There's even one in the Blue Mountains. So there has been an extensive list as it's been growing over this period since we've had the Avalon outbreak of venues where people need to, there's some where people need to stay home and isolate for 14 days as well as get tested. And authorities are really saying to people, we're very sorry, this is very annoying and it's a very frustrating time of year, but you really need to stay home for those 14 days because this is in the interest of the health and safety of New South Wales moving forward. So there is a very extensive list of venues that are on the New South Wales Health website, and they're urging everybody to look at them. There are text alerts sent out to people, but also just to look at them as well, because there may be casual contact venues where you've just got to monitor for symptoms. You don't have to stay home, but you still have to monitor for symptoms. We know that New South Wales has been on high alert, especially here in Greater Sydney, and we remain so, Selena.
And to Jonathan Hare now. And Jonathan, we heard about 28,000 tests in the last 24 hours. You're at a testing site there in the city's inner west. What have been the numbers like that you've been seeing going through?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm at a 5-dock drive-through testing clinic, which is the suburb just over from Croydon, where those 9 cases now are. And there's a little bit of good news here, to be honest. The lines that we saw early this morning, which were spilling out onto busy Parramatta Road, have pretty much cleared up. There's now just a short line and people have only been waiting 10-15 minutes before driving through to get a test. But there are lots of people across Sydney, across Greater Sydney, even down to Wollongong, that have been lining up to get tested today as those new numbers have come out and the new venues and alerts have come out telling people whether they need to go and get tested. From this inner west cluster, some of the venues that Ash mentioned as well, but there's locations in Bankstown, Bass Hill, Kings Park, Bardwell Park Roads and Casula, where authorities want people to be aware if they have been found themselves on a list of venue that they need to go and get tested. But yeah, there are encouraging signs here in 5 Dock with testing lines starting to get shorter as people have been processed.
Reporter Jonathan Hare there in Sydney, along with reporter Ashley Raper. Thanks very much for your time. And Victoria's 2-month run without any locally acquired COVID cases has come to an end. An additional 3 cases of coronavirus have been identified in Melbourne, taking the total number of new cases to 6 in the past day. Reporter Nicole Asher joins me now from Melbourne. Nicole, talk us through what we know about these new cases.
So as you've said, there are now 6 cases in Victoria. That's up from 3 that we knew about early this morning. We're told that of the 3 that we originally knew about, 2 are related. So the Hallam and the Mentone cases, a 40-year-old woman and a woman in her 70s, are related. Now, they were at the Smile Buffalo Thai Cafe in Blackrock, in the suburb of Blackrock, on the 21st of the 12th, so 10 days ago. And we believe that the authorities say that they came in contact with a close contact of the positive Mitcham case. Now, these 3 new cases are all related or all close contacts of those original 3 cases. And so they're now trying to trace back those 10 days that have passed since that Blackrock close contact, just to establish exactly how far or where this virus may have spread. We do also know there's been another exposure site added to the list today, so that now numbers 7. The recently added is the National Golf Club at Cape Shank on the 30th, so yesterday. There's also the Holy Family Parish in Doveton and Fountain Gate shopping centres, both on Boxing Day. Glen Waverley Century City Walk shopping centre in Mocha Joe's on the 28th. Mentone and Parkdale Beaches on the 27th, and Catialo Restaurant in Oakley on the 28th. So anyone who's visited those sites, and they can go online and onto the Health Department website just to check the exact times and refresh their memories on the dates. Anyone who's been to those sites has been told to go and get tested and isolate until they have heard that they're allowed to leave isolation or get a negative result. We're hearing that 52 people are now in isolation. That includes somebody in Leongatha, which is in regional Victoria in the state's east, and also someone in Barwon Heads, which is a tourist hotspot. So I suppose fears growing that maybe this has spread further. The authorities are clamping down as quickly as they can.
Concerns there's new restrictions. Talk us through what Victorians have to do now.
That's right. So I guess, to temper those concerns, Victorians now have some action to put into practice. Now, from 5 p.m. this afternoon, wearing masks indoors will again become mandatory, which I think, people will be relieved that it won't be outdoors. But yeah, if you're gathering indoors, you have to wear a mask unless it's in your home. There are also new rules on the number of people that you can have at a private gathering. So that's going from 30, which was introduced just before Christmas, down to 15. So there'll be some very difficult decisions being made ahead of New Year's Eve parties tonight. And the government's also urging or pleading with people, please don't come into the CBD tonight unless you have a reservation at one of the restaurants who are doing a eating festival to replace the traditional fireworks that are not going ahead tonight.
And what's happening in terms of the border closure?
So as of midnight tonight, there'll be a hard border in place, not only for Greater Sydney, for the northern beaches and the Central Coast, but also for Wollongong and the Blue Mountains. So people have until midnight to cross the border into Victoria if they wish to do so. If they've been to those areas, though, since the 27th, so Wollongong or the Blue Mountains, since the 27th, they'll have to get a test and then quarantine for 14 days, even if they get across before midnight. After midnight, there'll be no entry allowed for those people. However, up until that point, beyond that point, anyone in the green zones in New South Wales is still welcome across the border. But here's what the Health Minister has to say.
This is a very serious situation. Victorians who have sacrificed so much are not going to go back to a situation where we faced what we did in the past winter. We are ahead of this. We need to stay ahead of it. And if that means the public health advice is to move further on border restrictions, that is what we will do. So my message to any Victorian in New South Wales, including in the current green zones, is come back.
So that was the Health Minister, Martin Foley, warning people against travelling to New South Wales and also urging people to come back. And I mean, the authorities for a long time now have been very clear that this situation can change quickly and that people need to keep across what's happening, but also consider not going on holidays at the moment.
Nicole Asher reporting live from Melbourne. South Australia will implement a hard border with New South Wales from midnight tonight. Reporter Leah McLennan joins us now from Adelaide. And Leah, what has the government said about the border, and are there any exemptions?
Well, what the government has said is that they're increasingly concerned, especially as those cases are detected outside of those northern beaches in Sydney. So the state already effectively has a hard border with people from the northern beaches, and anyone coming from the Greater Sydney area has to quarantine for 2 weeks on arrival. But as of midnight tonight, there will be a hard border for all of New South Wales, meaning that nobody can come into the state from there. However, there are some exemptions, importantly. Returning residents can come back to South Australia from New South Wales, and anyone who's planning to permanently relocate to South Australia can also cross the border. There'll of course be people who are categorised as essential travellers. That's the same sort of category that we've had in the past with these border restrictions, like people transporting freight, healthcare workers, that kind of thing. There's also, importantly, for those border communities, particularly Broken Hill and other areas on that border, there's a 100-kilometre buffer zone. So anyone living in that 100 kilometres from the border in New South Wales will still be able to come into South Australia. So while it's a hard border, there will be exemptions for those categories of people. The Premier was also asked, with the concerns about cases now in Victoria, what that means for that border, but he said at this stage there's no changes there.
With regards to Victoria, obviously there are a few new cases in Victoria which have been reported over the last 48 hours. We have an excellent flow of data from Victoria over to us here in South Australia. We'll continue to monitor it, but at this stage there are no changes whatsoever to the arrangements with Victoria.
Leah, are there any new COVID cases in South Australia today?
Well, yes, there are 2 new cases, but authorities say not to be concerned about those because they are both returning travellers from overseas who are currently in hotel quarantine, so not linked to the Sydney outbreak. It's a man and a woman in their 20s, and I think one of those people is related to some other cases that have been recorded in hotel quarantine yesterday. But interestingly, the government today has said that they have struck one of the cases from a few days ago from the books. It was a man who had come in from New South Wales and had tested positive, but they've analysed his test, and it turns out that they believe it was an old case, even though the man had never been tested positive to COVID-19 before. He'd actually had it several months ago, likely, and has since recovered and is not infectious. So he's been taken out of the state's numbers.
Leah McLennan reporting for us live from Adelaide.